Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to see you all. I'd like first to begin by thanking the Kevorkian Center for Near Eastern Studies for organizing this event and for making this conversation possible. And it's a real pleasure to be here today to celebrate the release of the English translation of Loss and Lavender and to be in conversation with Sinan Antoon about his wonderful new work. Sinan, for those who may not know, is a poet, novelist, translator, and a scholar whose work spans literature, criticism, and public writing. His scholarly publications include the Poetics of the Obscene, Ibn al-Hajjaj, and Sulh. He has written extensively on Arabic poetry and contemporary Iraqi culture, with essays on figures such as Mahmoud Darwish and Sa'di Yusuf. His work has appeared in major Arabic publications, as well as at international venues, including the New York Times, The Guardian, The Nation. He's also co-founder and co-editor of the online journal Jadaliyya. Sinan has published multiple poetry collections in both Arabic and English, including the Baghdad Blues and Postcards from the Underworld, as well as 5 novels in Arabic, translated into more than 16 languages. His translation of his novel The Court Slasher in 2003 received the Saif Babash Banipal Prize and the Arab American Book Prize. As a translator, he's also brought into English works by Mahmoud Darwish, Sa'di Yusuf, Sirmal Willis, and other poets. His translations of Mahmoud Darwish is In the Presence of Absence, won the 2012 American Literary Translators Association Award. Recently, his translation of Isam Azim's wonderful novel, The Book of Disappearance, was longlisted for the International Booker Prize in 2025. Beyond writing, Sinan co-directed the documentary about Baghdad in 2003, reflecting on life in Iraq after the US invasion. In 2025, he received the Anand Mary Lifetime Achievement Award for his contributions to Arab American literature and culture. Sinan's wonderful translation of his 5th novel, of Loss and Lavender, the reason we're all here today, was published by Other Press earlier this month, and the novel has already been translated into several other languages. Without giving too much away, the novel follows 2 Iraqi characters, Omar and Sami, living in the United States, whose lives unfold side by side, each shaped in very different ways by war, exile, and memory. One bearing a visible wound, the loss of an ear, and the other by the gradual onset of dementia, each navigating a complex relationship to the past. So what we'll do today is begin with a conversation between us for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open things up for a discussion, all of you. We'll have a reception afterwards, and copies of the novel will be available outside and for purchase outside, and Sinan will be signing. So for the questions, maybe to start things off, Sinan, I'd be curious to hear about the origins of the novel. Was there a specific character, image, or question that served as a starting point that inspired you to write the novel?
Thank you, Khaled, for agreeing to moderate this conversation, and thank you to Kevorkian, to Fidel and the team for all the work. Thank you all for coming in these tough times. I should say that the publisher of the Arabic version of the novel is, of course, based in Beirut. I'm sure you've heard a lot of the publishers had to evacuate the southern suburbs of Beirut. And the Persian, the Iranian translator of this novel, I have not been able to get in touch with him since the war started. So anyway. Yeah, I was even reluctant to have anything for the novel, but Fidel said something that I've been quoting to others about it's important for the community to come together in these times. And So the seeds, it's always interesting how certain moments then become the roots for much later they develop. But early on when I came to the United States in 1991, and in 1995, while I was still at Georgetown and we were working on an Arab Studies journal, which was a student journal that became later a referee journal, we were looking for affordable printers. And I went with my friend Bassam Haddad to a press. And there I saw one of the workers in the background had a missing ear. And I told Bassam right away, he must be an Iraqi. And he said, how would you know? Because I had heard that about the law that the Iraqi regime had decreed to stem the tide of so many people deserting the army in the 90s. So that just, of course, the sight of someone without an ear just stayed with me for a long time. And then also early on, in the first few months of being in the United States, and this is in the pre-digital era where, you miss your mother language and mother tongue because there are no newspapers, there are no satellite channels, there's no radio. So I missed Arabic a lot. And in the suburbs of Virginia, I went to a restaurant and I heard one of the cooks speak Iraqi dialect of Arabic. So I stood up right away and went to him and I told him, يعني أنت تحكي Iraqi? And he answered in English. He's like, no. I don't know what you're talking about. I told him, no, I just wanted like exchange a few. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And that also stayed with me about, of course, the fear and for whatever reason. And then meeting people the different ways in which immigrants and refugees deal with the burden of being in this country. And so these are the moments when I look back. But in recent years in Iraq, in the Iraqi diaspora, but in Iraq itself, there are all these debates about kind of the contestation and the competition for who suffered more and which period was worse, dictatorship or post-2003. And that kind of, I just was thinking about it. And so that, and these two moments, and also thinking of how different generations of Iraqis and people of different class backgrounds, of course, view history differently, and also how in this country one's class background overdetermines one's trajectory. So that all fed into the two characters, Sami and Omar, who come from different class backgrounds and have different trajectories in this country and deal differently with whether one should hold on or try to hold on to their identity in this country, or which I've encountered people who have decided to completely sever the past and invent new identities. And so Omar, not to give it away, when he comes across someone who's named Omar and he thinks he's an Arab, but then discovers that he's a Puerto Rican, thinks, well, maybe I can be a Puerto Rican and avoid all the questions about, do you love Saddam Hussein or not, XYZ, and so on and so forth. Life is much easier to be a Puerto Rican, Omar. At first he thinks. Sorry, the answers are long. So انت وقفني يعني.
لا بالعكس
لما اعبر الوقت.
My next question is about something that stayed with me when I read this is the idea of memory and remembering versus forgetting. I think that novel seems to stage sort of a tension between remembering and forgetting, between holding on to the past and trying to escape it. How did you think about that tension while writing? Are these two characters meant to be antithetical to one another? Are they? How did you conceive of the characters when you were writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tried this earlier in a previous novel, Ya Maryam, which was about two members of the same family but of different generations of a Christian family who have completely conflicting narratives about Iraq's history and the place of Christians and whether Christians can ever survive or can survive. So here, yes, they're meant to be antithetical because maybe it's a cliche, but it's always fascinating to me and shocking how these two characters, because of their experience, because of their background, because of what they suffered in Iraq, see Iraq's history completely differently, and also see the United States differently. But primarily, I guess the tension that I wanted to highlight is that, of course, the experience of living under dictatorship is also colored by and overdetermined by class background. So Sami, who comes from an upper middle class and who was a surgeon, had the wherewithal to navigate dictatorship and kind of protect and create his own space and his family's space. But of course, it all comes crashing down after 2003. But for someone like Omar, or I should say that now there is, for years now, this whole notion of like the golden age of Iraq, or Jil Taybin, and so on and so forth. And of course, it depends on for whom and how so. So for someone like Omar, who already suffered economic depredations even before the sanctions, and who also did not go to college, and then had to go to the army and was drafted into the army, and then deserts not for ideological reasons, but for not wanting to be in such a constrained, disciplined situation, but of course suffers the consequences and lives with that. But also there's a kind of a shock when he arrives into the United States and discovers that the actual reality of life in the United States is not like Hollywood. And also it's shocked by the Iraqi and Arab community in Detroit, which has also a certain fantasy about what Iraq is and so on and so forth. So there is that collision with the diaspora as well.
Another question related to memory, the body, because the memory seems to be, the body is the place where memory is inscribed into. So one character carries a visible mark of violence, while the other's condition is internal, neurological, but they're all connected to memory, their relationship to the past. How did you think about the relationship between the body and memory in the novel? Because it's also something that you see in Iraqi novels in general, the idea of the relation between the body, the physicality of the body and memory. But you deal with it in a very different way. So.
It's a very good question. I don't know if I have a smart answer for that. No, I mean, it's how the memory is inscribed in the body, in the tissues, in the muscles, and so on and so forth. But specifically for someone who is marked by the regime and has to live with that for a long time, and even after he gets plastic surgery and all of that, the wound is still there and it's not healed. So I was just thinking of this different ways that our memories function, not just intellectually, but in terms of sensations and how the muscle memory and tissue memory and so on and so forth. But I guess, I mean, you kind of said it. The other related to that is the antithetical and the difference between Sami and Omar, and how one, which is common in the diaspora, wanting to hold on to memory and to preserve parts of it, while the other wants to completely erase it, but neither is completely successful. And to go back to what you said is that when we forget that, our memories also, we constantly, unconsciously edit and change our memory. It's not something that's constant. It's continuously changing.
Well, that's a very smart answer.
Well, give me an A.
Now, moving away from memory now, and body, the place. The novel moves between, I don't want to give too much away, but the novel moves between Iraq and different parts of the United States, including New York and New Jersey, a lot of familiar places that a lot of people here will find familiar. But none of these places fully settles into home. How do you approach writing about place in a novel about displacement? Because the two characters are never at home in the space of New York, New Jersey.
I mean, what struck me myself, having come to this country a long time ago, but also meeting a lot of people, is how actually we do, some of us, live simultaneously in two places. That any song or word or color or sensation takes you back, shuttles you back to where or smell where you came from. And technology now complicates that even more. I've seen in this city and elsewhere, immigrants, whether Chinese Americans or Arab Americans, who are mostly not living here. They're watching the news of back home. Some of them even don't speak a lot of English, so they're actually, bodily and physically, they're here, but for the most time, they respond to what's happening over there more so than what they respond to what's happening here. Someone told me a story about he was visiting his uncle, and his uncle told him it's going to rain today. And he told him, no, I looked at the weather, it's not going to rain today. But his uncle was talking about Mosul, not about Detroit, because he was still there. And not to make everything personal, but there are days, I'm sure most of us go through this, where I'm in the elevator or I'm with my colleagues in the faculty meeting, and it just dawns on me after 35 years that what am I doing here? I don't really belong here, but I also don't belong back there. So we do inhabit this in-between space. And we create these spaces where we can actually go back to where we were, with music, with food, with language, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And also about space in his house. I'm thinking of Sami's house in Iraq, how after 2003, you touched on the climate, the political climate, the sort of, you could call it segregation of like the neighborhoods and all of that, and they come, again, I don't want to give too much away, but also in that space, that space was also transforming, changing, becoming unfamiliar to Sam, but it's a very interesting historical period to also touch on novel.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been haunted by, like so many of us, by having to leave your home, or also under military occupation, how your city is no longer your city because it's completely changed by not only the presence of soldiers, but what happened in Baghdad is, whatever you want to call it, was ethnic cleansing because of everything, because of the chaos and violence unleashed by the United States. But in this area where Sami comes from, al-Jadaliyya, is that, a lot of the militias that came back with a certain vengeance and actually did force people out of their houses. And of course, the other important issue is, which was, the concept was coined in this country, this notion of de-Ba'thification, and who was considered a Ba'athist or not, and that becomes just a tool. So if you write graffiti saying Ba'athist on a house, that's it, it's done. And in this country, they always use the notion of mixed neighborhoods, or so. But most of the neighborhoods were mixed. So this idea that mixed was something unique, it actually was the normal thing. I forgot what your question was about, but no, I mean, Sami says that the character says we're under two occupations. One of them is the American occupation, and the other one is of the militias. If you go back now if you go to Baghdad, you'll see that the so-called Supreme Council of the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, who changed their names, they actually occupied al-Jadaliyya and kicked people out of their houses and took over. I mean, it was complete looting.
Moving on to translation, one of our favorite topics. So you translated of Loss and Lavender and also Ghostwasher from Arabic English. But how do you think, this is just a general question to start with, how did the process itself shape the novel, the translation, the novel of Loss and Lavender?
I mean, there was a specific challenge in this novel because and I don't want to give away too much, but Sami, who develops dementia, and his family is forced to put him in an institution, but the nurse that's taking care of him discovers that at the time there was a new treatment with music, whereby if patients who've lost a lot of their memory or cannot access memory listen to songs, their favorite songs or songs that have to do with a certain part of their past, then actually they're able to retrieve certain memories that they wouldn't be able to retrieve. And I wrote, in Arabic, I wrote how Sami would remember while listening to the song. So it's very fragmented. Also, his favorite singer happens to be Yas Khadr, whose songs are in the Iraqi dialect, and it's very challenging to translate that into English. And it's always a struggle with the editors who think, I understand that they have the best interest of the book in mind, but who think that this maybe is the American reader is not going to understand, or they're going to lose that, so maybe we take the novels out. And for me, it's like snatching one of my children, even though I don't have children. So, but that was a struggle to translate the songs, in particular the Yas Khadr songs, because there's some aspects are very contextual. But I've been doing, translation for a while now, so it's just a matter of perseverance and just not giving up and not feeling. Battling the feelings of why write and why translate when the world is on fire anyway. But sorry if that's not a very poetic answer.
No, but I think it also contains a treasure trove of like poetry, songs, and that have never been translated before, and to find it there in that book is just to have them there translated in English is I think it's an important thing. And they're beautifully translated. Yas Khadr, there are a couple of songs for Kalam Sahib, yeah, all text poems that have never been translated.
Also, it doesn't come out in English, but in Arabic there's a Yemeni dialect, a Lebanese dialect, and a Syrian dialect, and an Iraqi dialect.
Yeah, and also in the English, because I don't know if it's saying too much, but Omar is taking ESL classes, so that reflects in the English, but you don't see that in the Arabic, so that's also, yeah. Huh?
No, that's a good point. It's in translating into English. In the Arabic, Omar speaks, or I translate him into Arabic, even when he speaks English.
Mm-hmm.
But in the English, I had to really make sure that, of course, his English was never perfect and had a lot of ungrammatical expressions and so on and so forth. Also for the Latino, the Hispanic characters, also their English had to be the way they speak. That's very important.
Can you talk about the title, Khuzama, and how that got translated?
Yes. So titles is always a problem, but Khuzama, in Arabic, this sounds very poetic and musical, and it means lavender. But when I was talking to my agent, I know that sounds like, but don't worry. My agent is also the agent of about 65 other Arab authors. But she said that lavender in English sounds a bit fluffy, or like, it's like going into a supermarket. And at first I was offended. I was like, what does that mean? But come to think of it, I thought that the resonance of lavender in English is different from the resonance of Khuzama when you say it in Arabic. So we had to come up, or I had to come up with a suitable title. And what we came up with was Of Loss and Lavender. But interestingly, in discussions with the UK publisher, the UK publisher was like, we can't have lavender in the title. I was like, why? So like lavender gives the impression of like senior citizens and cottages and things like that. So they're like, so again, another compromise that it became Notes from a Lost Country. notes for the music and notes for the scent of the lavender. But it's a, I mean, one can write a whole article about the problem of titles with Western publishers. But I shouldn't be very negative. Right? We should thank them for publishing the novel, for giving a home to the novel in this time.
Because we're talking about lavender and music. I mentioned this to you once. It feels like an auditory novel, and then you have all the. It's not just about listening, but you also have the smell, the smell of lavender, and the sound of music. These are all triggers, like the memory triggers for the characters. So what really stood out for me is how much the novel works through the senses, through songs, poetry, smell. I'm thinking there are other examples besides lavender that I can't remember now. But these moments seem to bring back different kinds of memories, violent memories and happy memories. Can you talk a little more about how you approach writing about senses as an archive of experience, of memory? Do you see the senses as a way of accessing something that language alone cannot capture fully?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what in the previous answer or question we were talking about is how you are displaced into a different time and a different place because of a scent or because of even one word or because of a song. I mean, it has happened, I'm sure, to many of us. Sometimes I walk down New York and one of these guys who's selling shawarma or falafel, the Egyptians, most of them are Egyptian, and it's playing a certain song or it's playing a recitation of the Quran, and it takes me back right away to Baghdad where I used to listen. So it happens, and especially with the sense as well. And in the novel, it works significantly with Sami, as you'll discover later. And I'm not gonna talk about that. But I lost my train of thought about
senses and Sami's. The part that we don't want to talk about.
The person whose name shall remain. Well, in a way, in the songs, of course, that certain songs it's not going to give anything away, but the songs that, diaspora Iraqis play at the weddings in Detroit and elsewhere. It so happens that a lot of the songs that were, patriotic songs composed during the Iran-Iraq war that are all about war, somehow because the music is powerful and fascinating. But I attended weddings in Detroit when I saw people dancing to songs that were all about battles and bloodshed. And it was very bizarre, but of course they either don't know about the original context or forgot about it. And for someone like Omar, who has this gap whereby he sees these middle-class Iraqi Americans dancing to songs that for him remind him of his body being taken to bloodshed. So how songs mean different things to different people. It might sound like a cliche, but it has like a very visceral effect on him because, again, to speak of how the song, well, he works as a dishwasher and he hears this song and it completely takes him back to Iraq and his suffering there. So.
Yeah, I want to talk a little about history and war and how these manifest in the novel. War it's a constant present in the novel, but it's not explicitly named or anchored. The events are never anchored to a specific moment. Something that becomes especially apparent as the narrative moves between two characters and across different points in time. I mentioned that to you once. It feels like when we move from one timeline to the next, you get into the timeline without having to know the specific history of that war, if it's about the Iran war, if it's something else. Even when war is not explicitly named, it seems to structure the characters' lives in profound ways. and the novel traces its lingering effects in afterlives and everyday life. So was that something you set out to convey to the reader as well? Just the name, I want to say the anonymity of it in a way.
I mean, unfortunately, I mean, before we came here, we were talking about all the wars in Lebanon, and those of us who are old enough to remember, and sometimes wars overlap and intersect. But way back, I've always been haunted. I keep saying haunted by how I do believe that wars do not end. I've been written about it. They might end with a parade. They end for the victors. And in this country, of course, you always hear about the soldiers who are the victims, but for the civilians who live with the wars and carry the wounds for years, and now we know from science that it's even intergenerational. So I've always been, watching people that I know and observe who carry the wounds of wars, and wars do not end for them, and they continue. Even myself, I think once I was teaching a class and I heard a big boom, and I froze right away because it reminded me of the 1991 bombing. About how I don't want to spoon feed the reader too much information. I mean, this is always a challenge, and there's a tension. Of course, you don't want to completely lose the readers, but I don't want to give them too much information. And also, the way memory works is that it's really never linear, and it's always, overlapping, and you're lost. And so it took me a while to decide. I was always shifting the parts, the chapters back and forth. That kind of took me a whole year to decide what to put ahead and back and so on, how to have a balance between Omar and Sami. But also, by the way, there are jokes, and there is eroticism in the novel. We have everything. There is food.
There's pain, there's jokes, everything.
No, but the publisher was telling me, you have to sell the book. You have to sell the book.
I think pain sells more than. But no, I was going to ask maybe one last question, but you kind of answered it. But it's just the way you've set out to write a novel like this, because it feels like I'm thinking like I'm not a novelist by any stretch of the imagination, but the way you're laying out all the events, they work together even without having to know whose timeline this is. From the first sentence, you immediately know that's because there are two different timelines for the two different characters, but you immediately get into what timeline this is without having to see the names. So how do you structure something like that when you're at the beginning? I imagine it involves a lot of diagrams.
I don't do diagrams. No, I try to be more organized, but I take time to think about it a lot. I write down the names, but I learned something from Italo Calvino, the Italian writer who used to write big parts of his novel on index cards. And I do have short chapters, and this way you can shift easily, even without copy paste and moving, because sometimes on just one on the screen is too much. You don't see the whole novel. And then reading the index card and seeing how it flows. I mean, last year when we talked about Ilyas Khoury and how his narratives flow, to speak of music, there has to be some kind of rhythm in a way that works. But it's not easy. It took a while to decide that, but I don't have, maybe next time, this is a good idea. I'll have charts and stickies and all that. Some authors do, I think. I mean, I'm horrified when I see how some of them, everything is planned, but some of the parts that I like the most, came out without planning, as when you're in that zone and you're thinking and listening to music and something good comes out unplanned.
Oh, so the music was also involved in the making of. And we can also open up for discussion.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
At the start, we were talking a little bit about the experience of not just being an expatriate, but the internal dynamics of the expat community. And what I obviously talking about the book, which I've not read, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how the book might help us imagine this moment, an expatriate dynamics where we see people longing for the Shah, or we see in Venezuela people longing for, not just U.S. intervention, but a particular kind of, regime. Right? And so I wonder, in terms of thinking maybe about memory and loss, what is lost in that particular rememorialization of one's country, where what you appeal to is the later, what you appeal to is the intervention, and what that does for the future prospect of the sense of nation, whether it's in the country or outside.
Thank you. I mean, this is exactly one of the reasons why I chose these characters. Is for Omar, he was one of those who, when the US invasion took place, or there was planning for that, he was nonchalant. But then, in seeing Saddam's statue be toppled, he was elated. He was very happy. And even in the last 3 weeks, actually, because I wrote an article in Arabic about the connections between 2003 and what's happening now, and those who dance and sing, and those who don't, because in 2003, someone by the name of Kamal Makia wrote, "The bombing is music to my ears." But for Omar, yes, seeing the statue being toppled because his body is marked and violated, and his life was destroyed by that regime. But then later he, like some who are now or back then, realized that this, unfortunately, is it worth destroying the whole country to fulfill his desire of seeing the dictator fall? But I think it's a constant battle and contestation. And it's the refusal to, and the discussions amongst the Iraqis on social media and in essays are still ongoing, actually. I mean, it took 6 or 7 years for a lot of liberal Iraqi intellectuals inside Iraq to stop saying liberation and start calling it occupation, which tells you something. But even until today, so I mean, I don't want to toot the horn of the novel, but I think, without taking away from the specificity of the context, but to me and to many, the dynamics are very similar, obviously, in terms of how war is sold. Of course, now there isn't as much of any international cover, or we've done away with all of that. But still, the shifting goals of the war, with Iraq, it was weapons of mass destruction, and then nation building, and then democracy, and then fighting them over there so that we don't have to fight them here. Something similar is happening now, right? It's regime change, and then now it's opening the Strait of Hormuz. I'll do what a lot of authors do, which would like, to find the answer to your question, buy the novel and read it.
It's all there, yeah.
Everything is there.
Thanks, Sinan and Khaled. I have a question. I think that one of the things that struck me about the novel that I think is very difficult to do is almost a kind of contrapuntal wave between the stuff that happens in America and the intensity of memory. And that's not easy to do because there's a certain flattening that you manage to convey with the American experience. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit and how that worked in Arabic, because it's in a way maybe easier to convey in English. And I'm not sure if that's correct, but that's kind of my question, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, I resisted for a very long time to write a novel about the immigrant experience. I was getting this always in these interviews. strangely and ironically, from Iraqis and from Arabs, like, why you keep writing about Iraq? Why don't you write about the US? But to me, there's this, I mean, now I'm going to be negative again. There's this phenomenon of people arriving in Rome or Paris or London, and after a year, like writing a novel. And to me, it would take a long time to absorb the history and the culture of a place. But and you see, I didn't want to write this. I wanted to write something that was more nuanced and not like the grateful immigrant experience. It's something that brings out the complexity. So that's why I waited a long time. So I don't know. And in Arabic, I also didn't want to explain too much. I wanted things to flow, whereby they're just as much as would be needed for the character as if there was no audience to speak of. And then I guess the balancing of being critical and being aware of the microaggression and the racism and so on and so forth, but also dealing with the fantasies that so many immigrants come to this country with. And even though material reality chips away at these fantasies, they still hold on to something. But it's always through moments that we've lived through, what happens after 9/11 or the racism that he experiences, Omar and others, but also how, again, going back to class, for someone like Sami who comes and joins his son and lives in Brooklyn, he doesn't have to go through all of that, and he's shielded from so many of these things because of class privileges. I think it worked very well in Arabic, but you have to trust me.
You have to get the book too.
You have to take the book. Yeah, you've read it in English, now you have to go read it in Arabic.
Hi, thank you so much for this, Sinan. So many of the things that you said touched me, and especially in terms of being here while not being here, and also this endless desire to know what's happening in the place that you want to be but you can't be, and yeah, so I am thinking a lot about it as I created my own jet lag by just watching Al Jazeera all the time right now. And so I found that you don't have to go anywhere. You can just have your own jet lag while standing still. And I think it's also kind of creating this jet lag. It's not just not about the sleep, but that kind of the difficulty to relate, to be there in terms of the emotion, in terms of so it's like a literal but also mnemonic jet lag. And you've been talking about the hauntedness and being haunted. So I'm thinking about ghosts, obviously, and I'm thinking about the lingering, the sticky ghosts that are around. And I'm thinking about like how you think about the relationship between forgetting and remembering, because it is obvious that they are not maybe always the opposites of each other. So yeah, I mean, how do we think about ghosts while we are trying to make sense of the relationship between remembering and forgetting?
That's an excellent question. And I'm writing a whole novel actually that has ghosts. But actually, one of my the courses that I love to teach that I teach every year is all about the ghosts of the past. And we read Avery Gordon, but then we read Beloved by Toni Morrison, and we read Tissam's novel. So I don't know, I'm still thinking out loud of all these, but actually the poet that you mentioned, Sargon Bolos, and it's interesting that these three poets, Mahmoud Darwish, Palestinian, Sadi Youssef, and Sargon Bolos, whose countries were by and large destroyed, all then begin to have so many ghosts in their poetry. There's a whole literature about how actually that, in terms of thinking of a more just society or a more humane future, in quotes, one has to deal with the ghost of the dead, and the debt and what we owe all the dead, and they're increasing and then piling up. And about memory and forgetting, yes, it's really fascinating because it's it's the dialectic of both of them happening at the same time. But I just want to mention a personal thing about the jet lag is like, I was in Baghdad during the 91 bombing. And when I left, a lot of Iraqis and Arabs would tell me, oh, you know, it was so painful to watch Baghdad being bombed from a distance, and we wanted to be there with you. At the time, I was very dismissive. I was like, what's this silly, you know, who would want to be? And then in 2003, it took me that many years to understand that there is this unique type of melancholy of being far away and, you know, being helpless, but also of being in the belly of the beast and being in Rome itself, as it is unleashing all this barbarism. So it's one way unconsciously of wanting to approximate and be there or try to be there. But yes, ghosts for sure.
Ghosts all the way.
Buy my new novel when it comes out.
Thank you so much. I really look forward to reading the book. I recently was sort of arguing with someone who is from Lebanon. And one of the things that it was really hard to have a conversation was about, you know, living in the belly of the beast, and somehow you're living amongst people in which the destruction of the country that the society you're a part of is you know, doing this to another country, and the sense that it's not registering amongst people. You know, you walk in Washington Square Park, it's, you know, it doesn't feel that way. And maybe partly my question to you is about, you know, writing these types of works. How do you think about, you know, registering the pain of Iraqis in an American society? The second thing is, so I kind of assume from what you're saying about the characters, I grew up around a lot of these types of figures, and for some, they turn towards the world. They try to live, you know, a very fulfilling life. And for me, some of the experiences I've had is where people turn, like, they become, if I can say the word, aesthetics. They kind of turn away from the world. The passion of living is kind of removed, and even a lot of the things that, you know, thinking of hardships, working so many hours becomes like a virtue, so on and so forth. So yeah, just some thoughts.
No, yes, people sublimate all the time. And again, I'm going to sound like all these other authors who are more successful to say about the first part of the question. I wrote a whole novel about that. No, it's called The Book of Collateral Damage, because what I was saying about in 2003 and before that with Afghanistan, and living and seeing how, for the most part, I would always think that if someone came from outer space to the United States in 2001, 2002, 2003, they wouldn't think there was a war. But even here at NYU, most of our colleagues were completely oblivious and didn't even have the kindness to just acknowledge. So the Book of Collateral Damage is about two characters. One is in Baghdad, a bookseller who is living through the war and actually comes up with the idea of writing a history of destruction of the war, but never gets beyond the first minute because so much has been destroyed. And someone who lives here in New York and watches it all from afar and has to deal with what it means to be in Rome as Rome kills barbarians, and the apathy of everyone. Not only the apathy, but the normalization of barbarism and destruction of entire societies, and all the complicated ways that people justify that. Sorry to be anecdotal, but I had the pleasure of being in Berlin in this prestigious fellowship, and I get one of these guys from Johns Hopkins who's like game theory or some kind of bullshit. And he's like, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm from New York." He's like, "No, where are you really from?" So I said, "I'm from Iraq." He's like, "Yeah, it's really horrible, the 2003 war." He's like, "The 91 war, I was really for that." And I was like, "Yeah, that's the one that actually bombed the country back to the pre-industrial age and destroyed 113 bridges and water and everything." Which was great because he never talked to me after that. But yes, I mean, again, people deal differently with all of the pain, and it's happening now. So many people in this room have loved ones and homes in Iran and in Lebanon, and they are going through this horrendous experience of watching it all, and it's even become more barbaric because it's normalized. The sight of an entire village being blown up in South Lebanon, and it's not even a headline. This is the stage we're at now. So I feel horrible, talking about my previous novels, but I said everything in that book of Collateral Damage about this subject, not.
Hi, Khaled and Sinan. Thank you guys so much for this amazing book tonight. I'm really looking forward to reading the book. Not only am I reading for myself, but I want to get
7 copies.
Khaled asked a really great question on this translation of the title, but I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about the role that Islam of Lavender plays within the novel, both as a plant and a color. How does it end up coloring the work? To use that analogy and push it a bit further. Thank you so much.
No, sure. This Omar goes to Detroit, and there he's alienated by the Iraqis and the Arabs, and then, giving too much away, he calls the person who helped him from the Caritas, the Catholic relief agency. He tells her, can I go somewhere where there are no Arabs? And he ends up in New Jersey working on a goat farm, and then the owners of the goat farm buy the neighboring lavender farm. And this is when he starts to begin to feel settled, and lavender for him just represents something about, growth and coming back and tranquility and peace. But for the other character, I'm not going to tell you, lavender plays a different role. So even kind of like the songs and like everything else, there's the conflict of there's a complete contrast between how everything is approached. What to say? I'm sad that the title changed, but I don't know. I guess maybe we'll take a poll and say if lavender sounds like supermarket. He said it's like you're going to a supermarket or something. But yeah, I mean, it's a very important structural role for the lavender and how it signifies memory and which memory and how one approaches memory. إذا عندك إضافة.
I was going to ask, that's in all languages too? Because it was translated to French first.
The French, wallahi, I know the French did a lot of horrible things in the world, but the French publishers, well, I should say that it's the editor of the series at the Act Sud is actually a great serial intellectual, Farouk Mardan Bey, so he makes sure that titles are not disfigured, so they don't change them. Slightly, but don't change the titles. Time for wine and cheese.
Question?
Yes, well, kind of.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, not a long question, not. I mean, it may sound like not a serious question, but it is a serious question because the writing about barbarism of war seems exactly the prequel to writing about writing your campus novel. So I've
been thinking about it for the last 6-7 months, and I don't know. I'm itching to write the campus novel about what happened in the last 2 years. But I have so much anger and rage that I'm afraid it's going to take over, and it's going to become like a very long invective rather than a good novel. I just want to write like Scream for 75 pages. But I'm thinking about it. I will consult with you and other comments. The question is to publish it before going up for full professor.
It's of rage and violence.